Hi, that was a great film. Thank you. For the director, couple questions. How was he getting out of the country so easily? Because as I'm watching, I know going in and out of Russia, I've been there. It's not easy to get in and out. So that's my first question.
Right.
And parlayed with that was how he got the Nobel Prize out.
Right. Okay. Getting out of Russia, paradoxically, is very easy for Dima. They'd like him to get out and stay out. It's getting back in that's the problem. And
Yeah, well, I meant in and out. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting in is the one that always gives us a heart attack as it happens. I can't really tell you is the honest answer. I'm so sorry. Hopefully there won't be too many times where I have to say I can't tell you. Suffice to say that when I did a Q&A with Dima, he refused to answer, I think, 50% of the questions. So I'm hoping my batting average is going to be better. And your second question after that?
Just about the actual prize, the Nobel Prize.
Well, it's luckily enough, as somebody was saying to me, it's smaller than you think, as Katrina was saying earlier on. So he was actually able to get it out relatively easily on that way. I think that one I can at least say that he got it out on his person and nobody was looking. So that, I hope you can confirm that. I have to say your anecdotes certainly chimed with mine, particularly the impishness. Yeah, and he is ridiculously impish and occasionally childish, but but hey, I think in journalism we're all guilty of that. So,
yeah, thank you.
No, I have no clue.
All right. And other questions, please raise your hand. Okay. Well, yes, please, sir.
Thanks very much. The short movie had a reference to the organization Bell
and Cat.
Pottinger.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And for me, it shows there's a war against journalists. Could you comment further about how, well, just anything about this organization and other such organizations that are doing so much damage?
I actually weirdly know Tim Bell, but I feel that my colleague up there should go first. Or rather, over there. Go on, you go first.
Yes.
Because Bell Pottinger had such an impact in South Africa. No, silence. Okay, quickly. Bell Pottinger. Yeah?
Yes, Emilie, please.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you. It's actually a great question because Bell Pottinger indeed had a massive impact in South Africa. It was behind the word white monopoly, and it really spread immense polarization like around the world. But in South Africa, where, as Marianne Tam explains in the film, there is already racial tensions. It was just using what was already there to basically create even more chaos. And for women journalists, and at the time where the online attacks were happening, they didn't know where that was coming from. And they didn't know that it was an orchestrated campaign by Bell Pottinger around the Gupta leaks, which was, the leaks that led to Jacob Zuma, our former president's resignation. So what was interesting is that to see how everything was intersecting, and now we know, because of the work that has been done by UNESCO. There was a brilliant report launched in 2022 by a team of researchers that looked at how all the attacks online against women journalists had patterns that were similar, linking back to Maria Ressa, so also Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the word, for example, prostitute, and how that word came back. And it came also in South Africa. It was the same word that was used to attack Feriol Hafaji. Now, Bell Pottinger no longer exists, but at the time it was a really, really powerful organization that led those campaigns to silence women journalists in South Africa.
Can I
But are you
quickly-
talking about Tim Bell as
Timber,
well?
yeah. Yes. Do you
Because
wanna
Tim
go
Bell
for-
played a major role in the Litvinenko case.
Yeah, well, he also played he came to fame. So apologies for chopping across you there. He came to fame because he was his route to stardom, such as it was that he was integral to the rise of Margaret Thatcher to the prime ministership of Britain, and from that moment on, all around the world, regimes thought, if you want to get into power or indeed crush opposition, I know the man to call. And
the oligarchs used him quite a bit.
Boris.
Berezovsky
Yeah, Berezovsky.
had him on his payroll, and
Yeah.
And among Bell Pottinger's other clients have been the government of Saudi Arabia,
right.
the Foundation for Augusto Pinochet. They picked up $500 million working for the U.S. misnamed Department of Defense after the Iraq was occupied, and part of what they were doing is creating fake videos. Thankfully, they're defunct. They went bankrupt because of the scandal, the dirty campaign in South Africa, bankrupt and defunct. But these PR firms, it's so Emilie's right.
proliferate.
Yeah. They're more powerful than ever. Hill and Knowlton helped start the Gulf War back in 1990. They're more powerful than ever. These PR firms are really the enemy of independent journalism. Sure. Any questions, please? Okay. While you're, yes, please. Yeah, I can run the mic to you. Okay.
Thank you. Great films, the both of them. I guess seeing all of the jailed journalists there at the end and that long list that is there, kind of wondering, I guess, why Dima isn't a part of it, or they seemingly seem to have no real qualms about suppressing opposition. Is it a tactics thing? Is he clever at what he does, or is it just that
he is very clever at what he does? I mean, Katrina could probably give chapter and verse for me considerably earlier than me, but I mean, he's very good at navigating that tightrope, but now I think the two things that are protecting him are, first of all, his status as a Nobel laureate, which is, Putin knows that if he goes against him, it's a really big deal. That said, get the other side of the election, and you're looking at the 30-year rule, and I strongly suspect that he's in more trouble than he is already. I mean, I hope to God he's going to be okay, but I do worry a lot about that. And the other paradoxical thing that's predicting him at the moment is as soon as our film came out 2 weeks later, he was named as a foreign agent, which, was not a great moment. He was, of course, immediately it happened, he rang me up to say how much he liked the film, which was...
But Patrick, last time I saw Dima, he said that he was going back to, this was about 3 weeks ago, in New York. He was going back to Moscow to participate in the Defense of Memorial, the human rights anti-Stalinist organization that is going on trial and received the Nobel Peace Prize 2 years ago. His child, who lives in New York, Dmitry Muratov, his child was an intern at The Nation, but is very fearful of her father going back.
Yeah, and at the moment, he's appealing against his status as a foreign agent. And I think, oddly, one of the things in Russia that happens is they respect the form, but not perhaps the letter of the law. So while this churns on, he's got another measure of protection. But I'm as worried as Finlay as I'm sure you are. Putin will get an even greater measure of legitimacy when he gets the other side of that election.
Could I just say, I've always been fascinated the ties that it's an incestuous city, but Muratov's oldest child is an assistant to the central banker, Naibulina, who has kept Russia.
Yes.
On,
Did you see was? She lost the job.
Right, but absolutely.
Yeah, and she... but again, as you say, incestuous, and her status, I'm sure, helped him and her, bizarrely, anyway, again.
What he really cares about is the young journalists. He's kind of a great editor, but also a kind of father figure in some instances. But they're trying to find places for them to live, and going on the road is very moving.
Any other questions, please? Yes. Okay, person in the back, and then we'll come to your question. Thank you.
Hi, Emilie. This is Wendy, by the way. And I think this is perhaps the 5th time I've now seen your film, Section 16. And every time I see it, I find something new to admire in your film. So in your film, you sort of expose the way female journalists are harassed and targeted, in particular in South Africa. But that doesn't mean to say that male journalists are not also attacked and targeted. And I do know of one, Johan Botha, who was actually shot at point-blank range, sitting in a pub with a friend. And he was a journalist working on poaching. So I'd just like you to sort of explain how the harassment against female journalists are different from perhaps targeting male journalists. It seems like it's more insidious and it takes a different form. If you could just sort of elaborate on that.
Hi, Wendy, and thank you so much for your kind words. I think the main thing is, so around the world in general, all the research has shown that the attacks are much more sexualized against women journalists. So that's a pattern. I mean, the term prostitute says it quite, clearly already. But you can see that there is a form of a language that is used. I mean, there's often, calls for rape. Some attacks were sharing the journalist phone numbers, address. That's why, some of our journalists at the Daily Maverick needed to have special protection. In addition to this very highly sexualized, vulgar attacks, there is a sort of self-censorship that is that is specific to women journalists, and it is something that we see it happening, and you see it in the film when Polly van Wyk says, and I think Feriol as well says, "Oh, I could have gone and edited books, or I could have done PR." There is that sense of, why am I doing that to myself? Why am I doing that to my family? And we see it that, again, the research has shown that women will tend to self-censor quicker. And then there's the fact that those online attacks have real life impacts. And that we see, I think in South Africa, the language that was used, and again, Polly van Wyk talks about it, is sometimes reminiscent of the language that was used during apartheid. And again, because it is a very racialized, or that racial tensions are still prevalent in South Africa, it comes up quickly. So yeah, I hope I'm answering your questions, but you're absolutely right to say that it's not specific, the attacks are not specific to female journalists, and that male journalists are also attacks, and publishers and editors, and we do live in a country where press freedom is a right. Like we do live in a country that has a healthy press freedom, but it doesn't remove from the gender attacks that can be really, really violent.
Okay, thank you, Emilie. And we have a question, a person. Yes, thank you. You have a mic already. Go ahead, sir.
Is that on? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so attacks on journalists around the world is a kind of a constant state. Now, I was just wondering if there's a consensus as to what organizations can the international community support that protect journalists the best. And
I mean, in this movie, you see Dima going to that meeting in Paris with the reporters. It's Reporters Without Borders organization. I think it's one of the most important organizations. Every year, they put out a World Press Freedom Index where they rank 180 countries. And the worst two on the list are China and North Korea. At the top of the list, almost the same every year. It's like Denmark, Ireland, Sweden. Norway's number one. Ireland, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. Canada, you might want to know, is number 15 out of 180 countries near the top. And what I like is these summaries that Reporters Without Borders, they really think out their wording, and they say about Canada, generally positive, but then they could do a better job. There's room for improvement in coverage of indigenous peoples and land disputes. And of course, South Africa is 25th. I could read you, it's almost like Reporters Without Borders is thinking of the Daily Maverick. I found a quote. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah. South Africa guarantees press freedom and has a well-established culture of investigative journalism. In recent years, journalists have often been subjected to verbal attacks from political leaders and activists. It almost seems like they're talking about Daily Maverick. My country, the United States, pretty much invented freedom of the press. We're now number 45, and that's up a little bit. It's below Tonga and one step above Gambia. And Reporters Without Borders points out accurately that there are these structural barriers in the United States where wealthy individuals are taking over the media. We've lost, I think Katrina referred to it, 360 newspapers have disappeared in the last 5 years. And then we have the problem Katrina also mentioned that even the Biden administration, it's not just Trump, the Biden administration persecutes journalists, and they're trying to extradite Assange from the UK.
Questions? Yes. Okay, Mike is coming to you for there. Thank you.
Could you give a little bit of detail on the Assange, because Obama was the one that started it, correct? If I'm correct.
Not quite. It was actually started under the prosecution for espionage, for what he did in 2010 with the documents from Chelsea Manning, secret military documents and secret State Department cables that were so revealing of U.S. war crimes, revealing of U.S. diplomatic crimes. That's why he's being prosecuted for espionage. He's not even a U.S. citizen. It's unheard of. It was started under Trump. And everyone's been appealing to Biden to quit the extradition. The Prime Minister of Australia wants him to come back. He's an Australian citizen, wants Assange safely back in Australia. Members of Congress have introduced bills. Even mainstream journalism, which usually isn't great on some of these issues, when an alternative or independent journalist is persecuted, all of them have spoken out, and Biden just continues the persecution and extradition of Assange. It's shameful.
Where's that coming from?
Biden has always been very close to the war machine, and Assange is seen as an enemy of the war machine for what he revealed, and Chelsea Manning the same. Although you're right, Obama commuted the Chelsea Manning sentence. She was sentenced to decades, and I think only served about 7.5 years.
Thank you very much for the questions. Yes.
I would just want to thank both of the films. They're really great films, very powerful. So thank you very much. I have questions that I would ask of Patrick, but I also feel we have panelists that haven't had questions asked of them. And so I just wanted to give some space to Christiaan and Martin. Christiaan, if I know right, that you were involved in Bellingcat amongst other things, and I just wondered if you wanted to tell us a little bit about what you do or thoughts that you have from being part of this panel. And I'd say the same to Martin with fairness and accuracy in reporting, if there's things that you'd like to share with the audience here.
Thank you.
Yes, I was with Fairness and Accuracy Reporting, which is founded by Jeff, and I was sort of a co-founder. But I was also been an investigative journalist before that and after that. And I was sued for $100 million at one point for investigative journalism I did. Unfortunately, in California and some other states in the U.S., we have something called an anti-SLAPP law, which allows a journalist to sue the entity. In this case, it was a business that's suing them to stop the lawsuit if if it's frivolous. The problem is, as a journalist, we don't have much money, but these companies have a lot of money, and they can drag it out forever and just defeat you on that basis. Unfortunately, with the anti-SLAPP situation, I was able to prevail in that after 5 years of quite a bit of stress, actually. So, in the United States, although journalists have been described as enemies of the people as a group by Trump, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. We don't, generally speaking, we don't suffer the same kind of repression as we saw in the film about Russia. We do have to deal with the challenges of social media and being trolled and so forth. And that's an issue. And it is a whole new world in that sense. And both of these films were fantastic, and they really complemented each other as very, very well, I have to say. And just one other note I'll add. The nonprofit Journalism Without Borders. A friend of mine was a president of that, and he was a Spanish journalist. He was also a cripple from polio, and he was put in jail by the socialist regime after Franco for being a great journalist. He would not reveal his sources among the Basques. They were at war with Spain. So it's not just in countries like Russia where the repression is so vivid. It happens in many different levels, in many different ways, the attacks on journalists.
Thank you.
It's in the West as well as
Okay,
the
thank you.
so-called-
Christiaan, would you like to chime in?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'll keep it short because I think it's nicer for me to listen to everyone. Having now watched these two documentaries as well, thank you for having me here on the panel. But yeah, no, I used to work with a group called Bellingcat. Right now I'm with the New York Times, but I used to work with a group called Bellingcat, and basically it's kind of like a non-traditional investigative outlet, right? I mean, we never called ourselves journalists, but it was kind of like the power in numbers. The name came from a group of mice that is collaborating together to put a bell around the neck of the cat. And I think started very small. Now it's perhaps a little bit more well known for its work on Russia, but also in many other parts of the world. But I think what is interesting and what is sometimes what is exciting about the group is that it really allowed a lot of people that would otherwise not have been in journalism to go into journalism, because it's just basically using any kind of openly available information together with combined skill sets to try to hold power to account.
Well, thank you very much.
Christiaan, wasn't Navalny, Alexei Navalny was very involved with Bellingcat for a while, I thought.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. I have a question for Patrick. Patrick, in the film, Dmitry says something very, very interesting. Probably many of you caught it as well. He said, if I'm quoting correctly, I'm not an observer, I'm a participant, right? Which is something very unusual for a journalist to say, although maybe not all journalists feel that way. But do you want to comment on that?
Well, absolutely. Though I think, actually, in fairness, I think Katrina should go first.
Yes.
She was there right at the birth. Katrina, what would you say to that?
I'd say he's both. I mean, he certainly is a participant. He has been involved in helping build the wall of shame, all the anti-Stalinist activities, the political activities. He was very central. And he doesn't shy away from being involved in political, social, cultural activities, but he is a journalist, and I think he imparts that to his journalists.
Yeah.
And the focus on investigative journalism and rigor is something that's very important to the paper, because they get sued a lot, by the way, and he's in either a law court or arguing with still existing censors. So he's a newspaper person and loves newspapers, loves this website too, but I do think he is both. He's not just a participant.
Yeah. And I'd like to say, and I think it's also common to the both of us here, having started at the sister paper to the Nation, New Statesman, in that once you decide you can be a journalist and you can do it analytically, but you've got to have a reason for doing what you do. And that, I think, is why Dima says he's a participant, because he knows that his journalism will have an effect, and he will also take on the causes that are central to it. So he, as you say, you are both observer and participant. But
he likes to do the global campaigns occasionally, like to raise money for children's medicine, or to do kind of global poverty.
Sure.
And
yeah, I mean, I would have to plead guilty to being both. I certainly think I'm, in this. This is not my most unbiased work here. I am.
All right. Well, I'm going to follow up with two more questions, please. And if folks have more questions, please raise your hand. So since I'm on a roll here, Emilie, for you, please. I'm sure you've been asked before, but I didn't notice any black journalists profiled in the film, and I wanted to know what the thinking was around that, because it's something that I kept thinking about, and I see several people nodding their heads. And for Patrick, this is kind of a two-part question. Did you think about whether or not to include your connection to Dmitry in the film? Because I know as filmmakers, we always think about, do I include myself? Do I not? And because you did, how do you feel about that? And then the second part is, unless you speak Russian, you're working with translator. I think we see this, right? So is there anything lost in translation? Or does the connection kind of sort of compensate for anything that may have been lost?
Okay, let's do them in reverse order.
Okay, Emilie first, please. Thank you.
Emilie first.
So the definition, Ferial Raffaci and Karin Dolly are two women of color, and if that answers your question. And the reason why we focused on journalists at the Daily Maverick was we started filming in 2020, which was also the beginning of the pandemic, and we had access. I'm also a journalist at the Daily Maverick, so we had access to Daily Maverick journalists, and Ferial, Karin Dolly, Marianne Tam, and Polly van Veck were the four journalists who were featured in The Chilling, which is that report from the UNESCO that was published also in 2020, but the research started way before, along with Maria Ressa and Carol Kadlauer. And it was really focusing, so we used, you will see, we used a lot of The Chilling report as the research to work on the documentary. So that was, I hope it answers your question.
Thank you.
All right, quickly, because I'm worried about time. You're absolutely right. My Russian is terrible. So, and yes, I think something is lost in translation, even though Yelena, Dima, and I have been friends for 20 years. So there is a slight edge that you would wish was not, but it's as good as it can get. And first question, quickly.
Did you think about whether or not to include your voice, your connection?
Yeah, well, this is the only one of my films in which I will appear, I hope. And it's a sort of, it was itself a product of both distance and COVID, and also the impossibility of going to Russia at the moment for me. So I thought I had to be in it, and having decided that I had to be in it, I think I had to be honest about who I was and my relationship to him, and then whoever watched it could make their minds up what they were seeing. But you can see in the film that Dima often, he'll talk directly to me, Patrick this, Patrick that, and that's how it was. And I felt if you had that moment, and if you didn't explain it, you were letting everybody in for a false ride. So, that in a much quieter way was my price of truth.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Yeah. We have a question in the back.
My question is to do with the thing which most moved me in the film about Dmitry, which was the walk around the editorial offices with the plaques for the 6 murdered journalists on the wall. how Dmitry could still work in that place, I cannot possibly fathom, because it must have been such a loss. It was a loss to me, and I knew none of them. Has there been any success, any progress in apprehending the people, or is that a futile question because we know the answer? They were killed because they were Putin's enemies.
There's been no progress, none whatsoever. And there was a terrible event that happened last year. One of his star reporters went to Chechnya, and as Katrina mentioned, it is Russia's dark secret, dark black secret, in a black, actually I used, apologies for using that term, dark secret, and it is the stain on its heart. And she got out of the airport, she was on her way to report on a trial, and within moments she was beaten so severely that she had brain damage. And Dima said to us, right, I'm going in, I'm going to get her and get her back to Moscow. And a couple of days after, and he did, and he, it was incredibly risky and brave thing to do. And a couple of days later, Putin's press guy Peskov said, "Oh, we'll find who. We're going to apprehend these people. It's going to be," and that line was repeated in Chechnya itself. And it's a terrible crime, isn't it? Awful, which it indeed was. And there has been no arrest, and there has been no apprehension. And the same is true of what went on with Politkovskaya. Various people were sort of arrested. Various people sort of that. None, however, has ever really conclusively been proven to be responsible for what went on. Same is true.
And Dima, the newspaper, in fact, put together an investigative team.
Yeah.
Not trusting the government investigation. That didn't lead to much. But he's also, he wanted to resign, to step down after Politkovskaya or one of the too many. But the office itself, the atmosphere is, people are working, people are talking. It's you wouldn't know except when you go into that space where they don't often meet, but I guess they gathered for the film, which was important under the photographs.
Yeah.
But that they meet and they work, and
he regards it as both shame and motivation, doesn't he? He wants
drive. He says drive.
I think to broaden out while we're discussing these martyrs of journalism, that the Committee for the Protection of Journalists in the United States is a very mainstream group. And they put out a report every year about murdered journalists. And the report for 2023 said there were 99 killed journalists, and nearly 3/4 of them were killed by Israel in Gaza, journalists and media workers. And the Committee to Protect Journalists pointed out that in all their previous annual reports, in no other country in a whole year have there been so many journalists and media workers killed as Israel killed in the last 3 months of last year.
Yeah.
And of course, we have the case of Shireen Abu Akleh. She's a U.S. citizen. She was killed by Israel in Jenin. Israel immediately lied about it. The Committee to Protect Journalists, as I say, is very mainstream. They joined with the group I co-founded called Roots Action and 59 other groups in support of a piece of legislation that would have the FBI and the State Department investigate and report on that murder of a U.S. citizen in the West Bank. It never got out of committee. So I'm one of these people that I'm just tired of hearing about the U.S. and freedom of the press. We've got a lot to learn from other countries, and unfortunately not too much to teach other countries.
Questions? Patrick, in filmmaking, in the classroom and with journalism students, filmmakers, we talk about the 3-act structure, right? It goes back to the ancient peoples. 3-act structure. There must have been a 3-act structure in your film, but there's not much of a reprieve, right? Like there's a lot of tension all the time, except for a few moments when we get a breather. Was that a deliberate strategy?
Absolutely. I wanted to recreate the world in which he lives. I wanted you to feel that moment, that what he's in day to day, moment to moment. And that's why, for me, oddly, one of the most moving sequences is the moment in Paris where he just relaxes for a split second. Then he goes back to Moscow and Gorbachev, his paper is closed down and Gorbachev dies. And it's like, whoa. And, you know, I have now seen him subsequent to the film because we've done Q&A, and the look, I'm sure you'll say the same, you know, the bags under his eyes and the weight he's lost, the tension that man lives under, where you do not know moment to moment whether you're going to be arrested or what's going to happen, is extraordinary. I wanted you to feel that and then get to the end and have that message about the journalists and then think, oh, that's what it's been about.
We're almost out of time, and I thought I would throw the last question to Christiaan, who was a keynote speaker with us here back in 2020. And I'm just wondering, Christiaan, if you haven't already, I apologize, I was out of the room momentarily. Maybe can you at all enlighten us on what is the role of visual investigations and journalism going forward in the age of you know, the so-called post-truth age and AI and the ongoing threat to traditional journalism and investigative journalism in particular. I'm just wondering if maybe you can comment on, is this a good thing for the future of visual investigations and the world of public information or not?
Sorry, could you repeat the last thing? What is a good thing?
I'm just wondering if all, you know, the current threats that we see across journalism and investigative journalism in general, is this actually, does this open up opportunities for visual investigations, or are these same threats facing that world as well?
I mean, well, thank you for the question. I think, you know, it always will go both ways. Like there will be an increase of threats, but I think we will have to, and we have to be very aware of them. But you know, I also like to share some of the optimism, at least, because, you know, Shirin Abu Akleh was mentioned, and I think it is a very good case where, you know, often there have been so many journalists killed, and especially now in Gaza, as was mentioned as well, and often it is eyewitnesses will often say what happened, right? And I think what is so strong with a lot of the information that we have right now, for example, in the case of Abu Akleh, that the audio was used to basically determine where the shots were fired from. And even though the Israeli military initially denied, or not denied, but they kind of like said, well, it could have been armed Palestinian men that shot in her direction, which there were, right? There were armed Palestinian men in the vicinity. There were ongoing firefights. But the audio file, basically, because if a bullet leaves the muzzle of a gun and then is picked up by a microphone, you know, the difference in the two sounds that you hear, you can estimate the direction where they were fired from, and that estimation was only close to where the Israeli military was last seen. So why am I saying this? It's like, at least we as journalists, you know, we always have a task just to figure out what happened, right? And I think there is reason to be pessimistic because more journalists are being killed. But at least even with cases where militaries, whether it's the Pentagon, whether it's the Russian Ministry of Defense, whether it's the Israeli Ministry of Defense, whoever it is, we at least have way more tools at our disposal to investigate and say what you're saying is not right. Whether that's the Kabul drone strike, whether that's Shirin Abu Akleh, whether that's the poisoning of Navalny. And I think that is something to be optimistic about. At least we can properly investigate and say, at least we cannot say we didn't know, right? We are investigating it. And I think what is important, I think, is that more and more people are engaging with this type of information, and hopefully that will create also more push for accountability.
Thank you, Christian. I hate to be that person, but I think I have to call time. But that doesn't mean we can't carry on the conversation as we begin our closing night reception. And so if I may jump in here, Aaron, on your behalf, I just want to say thank you to our panelists, Emilie, Kat, Christian, thank you so much for joining us. You're all in wayward time zones, and so thank you very much for, on top of everything else, being here at a time that is certainly less than convenient for you. And so we send you our thanks and our love for being here on your own behalf, on Dima's behalf, and on behalf of journalism and journalistic integrity, especially investigative journalism. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.